Welcome children. Today we will take up the second chapter of your civics textbook, that is constitutional design. So see children, here you can see a photograph of our Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He is our elected representative. The citizens of the country have voted for him and he is governing our country. So in a democratic country like ours, the elected representatives are not free to do what they like to. There are certain basic rules which every citizen of our country, the leaders, the government, and in fact the whole nation has to follow. And these rules are written down in a book which is called the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the country. Okay? It is the supreme law, highest. We have to follow whatever is written down. Okay? And the Constitution determines the right of the citizens as well as the power and duty of the government. Okay? Now, in this chapter, we are going to learn these many points. Why do we need a constitution? How was the constitution drawn? Who designs them and in what way? What are the values that shape the constitution in democratic countries? Can amendments be made in the constitution? Can some changes be made in the constitution if required? So these are the 5 basic topics that we are going to learn in this lesson. Now this is a question which most of us have in our minds. Why do we need a constitution? Is it really important? Now to find the answer to that question, let us take an example of South Africa and let us see what happened there and how South Africa went about designing their constitution. During the 17th and 18th century, many trading companies from Europe, yes, they sailed across in order to find colonies where they could settle down and sell their goods. So they all came to South Africa in large numbers. Many whites came there and settled down in South Africa during the 17th and 18th century. They actually came to trade, but many of them migrated and settled in South Africa. Many Englishmen, many white people settled in South Africa. So you see many Englishmen who came as trading now settled down in South Africa and they became local rulers also. Once they became rulers, established a new system called the apartheid system. It was a system of racial discrimination. Now what is this apartheid system? This we see was followed in South Africa. What is it? Yes, it divides the people on the basis of their color of their skin. So if we look at the population of South Africa, the native people who were black in color were called as blacks. Then there were whites who came as traders and they settled down in South Africa, and they were very fair looking, and so they considered themselves as superior and they were called as whites. There were others who were called as colored. There were mixed races who mixed with the black, and that's why they were called as colored. And then there were Indians also who came to South Africa and settled there. So we see what kind of races. There were Indians, there were colored, there were blacks and whites. Children, now this apartheid system was very harsh, very oppressive, and it led to segregation. What is segregation? It's separation. Now how did they separate? You have learned this in your previous class also. The non-whites were not had the right to vote. They could not vote. They were forbidden from living in white areas. They could not build their houses or live next to the area where the white people live. They could not work in white areas, and only they could go there only if they had a permit, a card showing that they could go and work there. buses, medical centers, schools, colleges, cinema halls, beaches, swimming pools, toilets, all were separate for the whites and blacks. Okay, the blacks could not visit the church where the whites went to worship. They were not allowed to form associations or protest against any on their terrible treatment. So you see, this apartheid system was very, very oppressive. So children, you can see here are some pictures which you can see how the blacks were treated. You can see the entry to the station is also saying one is the European line, the other is the non-European line. Another picture which is showing demarcation that this is the white area, blacks are not allowed. Then you can see how they were repressed by the whites, and the whites then started ruling on them. They became their rulers. The blacks now were really fed up of the oppressive policies that were carried out by the white people, and it is now they decided to struggle against this policy of apartheid, that is the distinction between the color of the skin. And the blacks, as I showed you, how they were ill-treated by the whites, and this led to beginning of the struggle against this policy of apartheid. As I told you a little while ago, that the non-whites were treated as inferiors. They were completely oppressed by the whites. They were given no rights to vote. They were not allowed to form associations. They were not allowed to live with the whites. So in order to fight for their rights, an organization was formed in 1912, which was called as the African National Congress. Okay, but since the atrocities of the whites increased day by day, many blacks, colored Indians began to raise their voice against the oppressive apartheid policy, and they all joined this organization's ANC, that is African National Congress, and organized protests, strikes, rallies, okay, against the white government. That's all that they started doing, and even the white people who agreed that this was a wrong policy, they also joined in this struggle against the white government. But the government detained many of them, tortured, killed many of these protesters, and they continued to rule. Nelson Mandela led the struggle against the government, against this apartheid policy of the government, and in 1960 his organization ANC was banned by the government, but yet he continued his protest, march and strike, and many people joined him in this protest. But the government tried to suppress everyone. They tortured, detained, killed, and it said they killed about 1,000 people. And even Nelson Mandela was tried for treason, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964. Treason means that he was dared to oppose the apartheid policy, and 7 of his other friends were all imprisoned in the most dangerous prison of the country, which was called as Robben Island, and he was kept there for 28 years. But even after his imprisonment, these protests against the apartheid policy continued. Let us now understand the sequence of events through this timeline slide. So you can see in 1912 an organization was formed which was called as the African National Congress, or ANC, and its main objective was to fight for the rights of the blacks, okay, to fight against the apartheid movement. And we see this fight started as early as 1920, and it gained momentum more during 1950, where we see the colored people, the Indians and the blacks, they gathered together to fight against this apartheid system, okay, and they launched marches, protests and strikes against the white government. Now when the white government saw that these were gaining more popularity, in 1960 they banned ANC, okay, says this party is banned now, so you cannot protest. But Nelson Mandela, along with his other leaders, they continued the protest, okay, and finally in 1964 the protest increased so much that the white government killed many of these black people, put them in jail, but yet the protest did not stop. So they finally arrested Nelson Mandela and put him into jail and gave him life imprisonment, and he was sent to a prison called Ripon Island, which was one of the dangerous prisons in this country. But even after his arrest and life imprisonment sentence, the protests continued and gained more power, and now we see more people joining the ANC, that is the African National Congress. They were colored, they were communist people, they were workers, they were sensitive whites who believed that this was a wrong method of ruling. They also joined the ANC, and the protest and the struggles continued and continued. Several countries also across the world protested against this apartheid system and called it as unjust and racist. But the whites continued to rule, and they kept on killing and detaining thousands of people. But when they saw that this struggle is increasing day by day, yes, they had now, they said, they understood that they could no longer rule through this repression policy. So they had to change their policy, and finally all the discriminatory laws were repealed, and ban on media and political parties were lifted, and after 28 years they finally released Nelson Mandela. Okay, and with negotiation with Nelson Mandela and the government, finally on 26th April 1994, South Africa became a free democratic country. Now children, after the formation of the new democratic South Africa, now the black leaders, Nelson Mandela along with his fellows, they appealed to the citizens of the country and told them to forgive the whites for their atrocities that they had committed while they were in power. Says, let's forgive them, and now let's work together to form a new government and a new kind of living in South Africa. Now they wanted to build a new South Africa based on these qualities, on equality, all races, on men and women, on democratic values, social justice and human rights. Okay, so both Nelson Mandela and the white government, they sat together to draw up a common constitution, and after 2 years of discussion they came out with one of the finest constitution that the world has ever had, and this constitution gave its citizens rights. So together, that in search of they said we must work together in search of a problem. Nobody should be excluded, nobody should be treated like a demon. Everyone should be a part of the solution. So everyone should be involved in the solution making of the country. Everyone's views must be considered, and that's how finally they have got one of the finest constitutions in the world. Now the South African constitution now inspires all the democratic countries all over the world. A state, this country which was looked down upon till 1994, they said, my God, it's so undemocratic, the most undemocratic country that they had seen. But now they all see it as a model of democracy. What made this change possible? Yes, it was possible because the people of South Africa agreed to work together and solve the problems. Why do we need a constitution? Let us understand this by the example of South Africa. Now children, what does a constitution do, and why does every country need to have a constitution? Now take for example, we need to play a cricket match, and there are 6 to 7 teams who have come to play a cricket match. Okay, so before we start the match, we write down certain rules for the match, isn't it? Rules are written down which they have been agreed by all the teams, okay, and then only the match can start once you have agreed with the rules of the game. Okay, so if the rules are not there, what will happen to that match? It will not be played properly. There will be confusion and chaos, and nobody will declare themselves as a loser. Everyone will put in the finger and says, we have won the match. So for the smooth functioning and to avoid chaos and confusion, rules need to be written down. Similarly, like if you go to a club or a cooperative society or political party, rules are written down so that the organization can work smoothly and effectively for the people, isn't it? So this is why every country needs to have a constitution for the smooth functioning and governance of the country. So children, after the formation of the newly democratic country South Africa, the oppressor and the oppressed were now planning to live together as equals. Okay, it was not going to be easy for them to trust each other. They had their own fears. Now, who are the oppressors? It's a white government who continued to rule over the blacks and suppress them, ill-treat them, and treat them like slaves. And who are the oppressed? They are the people who suffer all the kinds of ill treatment that they gave them. They are the blacks. So here, but now, once they have now agreed to live together as equals. Now, living together was not very simple. Okay, they had their own fears. Now, what did the blacks fear? What if apartheid starts again? What if the whites start doing that? And then what were the whites thinking? What if they throw us out? So these kind of fears were in their minds. And the blacks wanted majority rule. They said no, whoever wins must come as a majority, and since 75% were blacks, they wanted the black government. And they believed in one person, one vote. And they also wanted the rights for the poor and the workers, that they should be protected properly and safeguard their interests. Whereas the whites, they did not believe in absolute majority rule, because they thought that if the majority rule will be there, then will be only blacks. They will be in minority, and they might be ill-treated by the blacks, and they were scared that their property might be taken away by the blacks. So these were the kind of fears that were there in the minds of both the blacks and the whites. But blacks were in majority, 75% of the population were blacks. Now, after a long negotiation, both the blacks and the whites agreed to a compromise. The blacks agreed to the demands of the whites. Now, what were the demands of the whites? They wanted majority rule should not be absolute. That means they should be the rights of the minority should also be looked into, because the whites were in minority. Majority were the black population. 75% of the population were blacks. So they agreed to that they will look into their needs also, and they will not take away the property of the white. The whites also agreed for majority rule, one person, one vote, and they believe that the rights of the poor and the workers should be protected. So they both the parties agreed to each other's demands, and whatever there were fears, they were compromised, and that's how they went about working together. Now children, even when after they have agreed to the compromise and they have agreed to each other's demands, what was the guarantee that this trust will not be broken in future? Yes, let us see. Now, in order to build that trust, both the whites and the blacks wrote down certain rules, certain basic rules, like how the leaders are to be chosen, what the government can and cannot do, the rights of the citizens, and they said that these rules will be supreme, it has to be followed, no government will be able to ignore this. And all these rules were written down in a book which is called the Constitution. And once these rules are written down, then only they can work together as equals. So children, if we have to describe what is a constitution, yes, it is a set of written rules that are accepted by the people living together in a country. It has to be followed by all citizens, leaders, and the government. Now let us look into some of the reasons as to why we need a constitution. Now the first point is it generates a degree of trust and coordination that is necessary for different kind of people to live together. Now we have taken the example of South Africa. You see the majority was the blacks and the minority were the whites. Okay, so they both of them did not trust each other. And how did they trust each other? Once they wrote down the rules and put it into a book which is called the Constitution, and then the trust began between each other that the rules are now written, everyone has to follow, and that the so it created a trust and coordination where people of different groups and sects could live together. Now, even in the constitution, it is written down how is the government going to be formed, what are the rules for the government formation. Like you will have an election body, the people will come to vote, people will stand for election, then elected representatives will be chosen on the basis of one person, one vote. Like we have universal adult franchise. All these rules are written down in the constitution as to how the government is going to form, who will get more powers to take decisions. Like here we choose a prime minister, what are his powers going to be, what decisions he is going to take, what are the powers of the president. Each and everyone's powers are defined. Okay, they cannot misuse their powers. Now the third point is that the constitution lays down the limits to the powers of the government. That government can only do this much. Okay, it cannot act like as a dictator. And we look into the problems of the people, and the fundamental rights of the citizens are also written down in the constitution. Now the fourth point is that the constitution expresses the aspirations of the people about creating a good society. What the people think their country should be, what kind of a country they believe to live in. All these, their dreams are looked into, and then the rules are framed. That is why once the rules are framed, it becomes the supreme law of the country which everyone has to follow. So the constitution also expresses the dreams and aspirations of the people of the country. Now the fifth point is why we need a constitution is because the constitution is considered as the supreme law of the country, and it tells us that everyone in the country has to follow the rules, whether he is a citizen, whether he is the leader or the government, the whole country has to follow. So a proper balance relationship has been built between the citizen and the government, that citizens know their duties and rights, even the government knows their duties and rights, and that helps the country to run smoothly. Now today most countries in the world have a constitution. Now as most countries have a constitution these days, but it is not necessary that all countries that have a constitution are democratic countries. But yes, all countries that are democratic have a constitution. Now after the War of Independence against Great Britain, America gave themselves a constitution, and even after the French Revolution, France also constituted their constitution, and since then it has become a practice in all democratic countries to have a written constitution. Let us now look into the making of the Indian Constitution. So far we have seen how the Constitution of South Africa was adopted and written down, and the blacks, that is the South African natives, had to fight against the white government for their rights. Okay, and the apartheid policies. Finally they all worked together to frame one of the best constitutions in the world. Okay, but even in India there was many difficulties that we had to go through before we could frame our constitution. Okay, first of all, India was a vast country. Okay, and the population is very diverse. There are communities belonging to different religions. So to keep in mind all these communities and then to frame the rules for the country was a difficult task. India has become independent, and the people were now actually emerging from what they were like subjects earlier to now they were citizens. Earlier they were subjects, that means whatever the British government told us to do, we used to do that, okay? But now it is a free country after independence when the Britishers left, okay? And we were free, now we became citizens. So we still did not know how to go about ruling the country, okay? So we were still emerging from the status of subject to citizen. Now when the Britishers left, they partitioned our country. So two countries were formed, India and Pakistan. So at that time this part was called as West Pakistan, and the Bangladesh, which is now, was called as East Pakistan. And it was a horrible traumatic experience for the people of our country, because the Muslims from our country were moving to Pakistan and Hindus from Pakistan were forced to come to India. So, and there was bloodshed, violence all over the country. So our country had to go through these difficult times, and in those times to frame this was one of the difficult part, to frame the Constitution of India. Another difficulty was that there were 500, more than 500 princely states in our country which were ruled by Rajas. And so when the Britishers left, they gave an option to the princely state whether to join India or to join Pakistan or remain independent. Now to merge all these princely states into one country was a difficult task. So you see, children, like South Africa, which had to struggle for getting independence, even we, after independence, we had the struggle because our country was partitioned and there was movement of people from India to Pakistan and from Pakistan to India, and in that process 10 lakh people were killed in this violence. Another difficulty I told you was about the 500 princely states which were given the option either to merge in India or not, or to remain independent, and this task was very, very difficult to convince them to form into one nation, India. Now, despite of all the difficulties that India faced after independence, now what were the difficulties? One was that the country was diverse. Second, that the partition of our country, and the third is unifying the princely states. Okay. Unlike South Africa, they had to create a consensus. That means they had to take their public into confidence and ask them what kind of a country they want for South Africa. But for us, the consensus was already formed, because we had gone through our freedom movement and freedom struggle, and people already had a basic idea of what the country should be once we get independence. So much of the consensus about democratic India, how it should look, and had already been formed during the freedom struggle. And now it was not only to drive the Britishers away from the country, but it was time now to reunite the people of our country together. Now the Britishers had given voting rights to only few. Okay, so in 1928, Motilal Nehru, along with 8 other Congress leaders, drafted the Constitution, and this draft included all the values that were accepted by all the other leaders. What were the values? Yes, they were universal adult franchise. That means everyone will have the right to vote if he is an adult. Right to freedom and equality, and protecting the rights of minorities. These were the basic values which were agreed by all the leaders, and in 1928 Motilal Nehru drafted this constitution. Now our leaders learned from other countries as to how to go about drafting the constitution. They adopted great details. They looked into the laws made by the British government, that is the Government of India Act of 1935, which was a great help. Then they also took ideas of the French Revolution, equality, liberty and fraternity. Then they took from Britain the practice of parliamentary democracy, from USA the Bill of Rights, and they learned from Russia the Socialist Revolution. Now, the makers of our constitution makers were not just imitating, but they were also questioning whether these things will suit India or not. So it was not just imitating and putting that into a constitution. We were really questioning ourselves as to whether these things, the ideas of French Revolution or the Bill of Rights or parliamentary democracy, will work for our country or not. Now the question arises as to who were the makers of the Indian Constitution. Yes, the drafting of this constitution was done by a group or an assembly of elected representatives, which were called as the Constituent Assembly. And elections to this Constituent Assembly was held in 1946, July 1946, and 5 months later, in 1946 December, its first meeting was held. Soon after the first meeting of the Constituent Assembly in 1947, our country was partitioned. Okay, not only the country was partitioned, but also the Constituent Assembly was divided into India and Pakistan. Now, after partition, the Constituent Assembly was divided into two parts. One became the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan and other the Constituent Assembly of India. Now, the Constituent Assembly of India had 299 members, which sat together, worked for 3 years and wrote down our Indian Constitution. And this constitution was adopted on 26 November 1949, but it was implemented on 26 January 1950, and this day, 26 January, is celebrated every year as Republic Day. Now the question arises as to why should we accept the constitution made by the Constituent Assembly more than 6 decades ago. So this was a question which arose in everyone's mind. Most countries all over the world had to rewrite their constitution and frame a new constitution. Now there are basically two reasons. One, because it existed only on a piece of paper and was not followed properly. Secondly, the rules were not accepted by all the people of the country, to all the various diverse groups that are there in every country. We have a diverse group, it belongs to different religion. It was not accepted by all. But this was not the case of independent India. In India, we didn't see that this was not accepted. The constitution that was once formed is being followed till today. Now why? We will look into the reasons. Children, the Constituent Assembly that was formed had 299 members, and they represented the people of India from all sections of society. Okay, so everyone, whether you was rich, poor, belonging to various religion, caste, creed, occupation, everyone was included, and that's how when they all sat together, then we formed this Constituent Assembly, a group of people who finally thought and then wrote down our constitution. Now you will ask me a question as to when only few people were voting, how did this Constituent Assembly that was formed represented the people of India from various sections of the society? Now, the members to the Constituent Assembly were elected from provincial legislatures, which were there all over the country. So we see from all over the country they were elected, and then 299 members were chosen to form the Constituent Assembly. Now most of the members of the Constituent Assembly came from the Indian National Congress. Now again a question may arise in your mind, then how come it represented the people of India? The Constituent Assembly represented the people of India. Now all the members who were there, mostly from the Indian National Congress, belonged to different languages, different class, religion, occupation and caste. Okay. Now children, if everyone also had got the right to vote, that is having universal adult franchise, yet the composition of the Constituent Assembly would not have been different, because they belonged, as I told you, to various sections of the society, various caste, religion, occupation. Every was a diverse group, and that is how, when they sat to make the constitutions, everyone's problems and ideas were looked into. And that is why when our constitution was made, it was accepted by all the people of our country. Now, this question as to why we should accept the constitution that was made almost 70 years ago. Yes, because we see the Constituent Assembly that was formed had 299 members who were elected by provincial legislatures. And as I told you, most of the members belong to the Indian National Congress, but they were from various diverse groups belonging to different languages, caste. So even if at that time we did not have universal electoral franchise, that means everyone was not given the right to vote. Even if it was not that, the composition of the Constituent Assembly would not have been different, because it had members from diverse social groups, and then the constitution was made, which is acceptable by all. The Constituent Assembly, once formed, worked in a very systematic, open and consensual manner. Everyone's views were taken into consideration, and that is why we still follow the Constitution, and we strongly believe in our Constitution, and gives the sanctity to the Constitution. That means we consider it as a holy book. Now, first of all, when the members got together, and they decided and agreed on certain basic principles. Once this was decided, a drafting committee was formed. So once the basic principles were decided and agreed by all the members of the Constituent Assembly, a drafting committee was formed which would draft the constitution, and it was headed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Now, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar headed the drafting committee, and once they drafted it, there were rounds of discussions. Everything was discussed in the assembly, and then amendments were made. Some changes were made. There were about 2,000 plus amendments were made and considered, and a thorough study was done by the Constitution over 114 days, and it took over 3 years. Every word, every document has been discussed, and it has been recorded. Whatever discussions have been recorded and preserved. So every document, whatever was spoken on the articles that are written in our constitution, the principles that are written in our constitution, everything has been recorded and discussed, and then it has been preserved too. Now, every document that has been written down, every word that has been written down in our constitution was discussed, and the discussions have been recorded and preserved, and they are called as Constituent Assembly debates. Now, when these Constituent Assembly debates were printed, they came as 12 bulky volumes. Such a huge volume of these debates. Now, why were they recorded and preserved? Yes, because whatever they have written down in a constitution with discussion, they have really explained and interpreted why these were included in a constitution. Okay, so if anyone has a doubt on why these were included in the constitution, can always refer to these debates, where the real meaning of the inclusion is given in these 12 bulky volumes. So everything has been recorded, and if you question why this was done, we can always refer to these constituent debates, which are in 12 bulky volumes. And that is why the Constitution of India is a very long and detailed explanation is given in the Constitution. Moving ahead to the next topic of this chapter, guiding values of the Indian Constitution. Let us now understand the overall philosophy of what our Constitution is about. Now, children, to understand the philosophy of our Constitution, we can do it in two ways. First, we can understand by reading the views of some of our major leaders who are written on our Constitution, and the second is by reading what is written down in the Constitution, which is called as a preamble of our Constitution. Now, by looking at the pictures of the Constituent Assembly, you must have noticed that Gandhiji was missing in that. He was not a member of the Constituent Assembly, okay, and yet there were many members who followed his vision. He, in his book called Young India, he had already written of what kind of a constitution he wanted for India. Okay, so he had already expressed his views on that, and many of the leaders followed his vision. Another leader, B.R. Ambedkar, who played a key role in the making of our constitution, he is called the father of our Indian constitution. He believed that inequality should go away from our country, and he worked towards them. But he did not agree with the ideas that were written by or given by Mahatma Gandhi, and oftenly it was seen that he criticized Gandhiji and his vision too. Inspired from USA, most countries choose to begin their constitution with a preamble. Even our constitution begins with a preamble. What is a preamble? A preamble is a short statement of the constitution's basic values. Now, the preamble of our country reads like a poem. Okay, it's like a poem on democracy, and it contains the philosophy on which the entire constitution has been built. So we can say it is the soul of the constitution. Let us read this preamble of our constitution. You can see it's written here: we, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens justice, both justice, social, economic, and political, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship, equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among them all fraternity, assuring the dignity of the individual and the unity and integrity of the nation. In our Constituent Assembly, this 26th day of November 1949, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves this constitution. Okay, so this is the preamble that is there on the first page of our constitution. It is like an introductory, like every textbook has an introductory page. Similarly, the constitution has a preamble, which is an introductory page. Now we will look into all these highlighted ones and study it thoroughly and understand what all these words mean, like sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, republic, justice, liberty, equality, fraternity. So let us look into the details of this. Now children, let us understand what this term we the people mean. We the people mean that we, the citizens of the country, have voted for the members. Yes, we have elected representatives who are representing each and every Indian into, and they all gathered together, 299 members, which form the Constituent Assembly. Okay, so the constitution has been drawn by the people through the elected representatives, and it is not just handed over by a king or any external power. Okay, so we the people of India have formed our own constitution. Now let us understand this word sovereign. Okay, it is given in our constitution. What does it mean? It means that a country has the right to take decisions on external as well as internal matters of the country, and no external or internal authority can pressurize the government to take any action. Okay, so we are called as sovereign, that a country has a right to take decisions on external and internal matters of the country. Nobody can pressurize, no external power can pressurize to take any decision. Okay, now the next important word that we should know the meaning is socialist. Now what is socialist? It means that the wealth should be divided equally among all sections of the society, and the government should work for the upliftment of the poor and the downtrodden sections of the society, and the government should regulate ownership of land and industry. So we had learned last year that we followed a mixed economy model, okay, where even the government and the private sectors both work together to reduce this socio-economic inequalities that are there in our country, difference between rich and poor. Okay, the next word that we must understand is secular. Now, what is secular? India is a secular country, we say. It means that the people of India are free to follow any religion. Okay, we do not have any official religion. India does not have any official religion. Neither it encourages nor discourages any religion in India. So every individual in our country is free to follow his or her religion of choice. Okay, if he wants to change it, it is her choice. So India will not encourage nor discourage anyone to follow any religion. Okay, and we have no official religion. Now another word is democratic. What does democratic mean? That the government is elected by the people and the government is to be run according to certain basic rules which are mentioned in our constitution, and people also here enjoy some basic rights and freedom. Okay, so that is a meaning of democratic. Okay, the next word is republic. Now, what is the meaning of republic? That means the head of our state, which is our president, he is elected, although indirectly elected, but he is elected, and the position is not hereditary. So that is the meaning of republic. Another word that we must understand is justice. Now, what is justice? That means the citizens cannot be discriminated on the grounds of caste, religion, and gender. Okay, so this is about justice. Everyone will be getting justice irrespective of caste, religion, and gender. Liberty means that the citizens are free to think and express their thoughts, whatever they think and their actions. They are free to do whatever they feel like, as long as it doesn't hurt the other one. So we are free. We are free to think and express our thought. That is the freedom that we have got. Now, the other word is equality. What is equality? It means that all the citizens are equal before law, irrespective of caste, class, gender, or economic status. Everyone is considered equal. Fraternity means that we should live together in one country and have faith in each other, and we should consider no one as inferior and consider everyone as equals, and also develop that feeling of brotherhood among us. So finally, on 26 November 1949, our Constituent Assembly adopted the Constitution, although it came into effect only on 26 January 1950. But the entire process was over and we got our Constitution on 26 November 1949. Now, what are the learnings that we have got from this preamble? We know who is the source, who are the people who were involved into the writing of the Constitution. It was our people who elected their representatives, about 299 members who formed the Constituent Assembly. They sat and worked for 3 years and drafted the Constitution for our country. Now, what is the nature of our Indian state? How is our Indian government going to be? It is sovereign, socialist, secular, and democratic republic. So these are the words I've already explained to you. What are the objectives of the Constitution? It says justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And when was it adopted? 26 November 1949. So this is our learnings from the preamble, and it gives an introductory of what the Constitution is all about, what is the philosophy of our Constitution. So it is basically called the soul of the Constitution. Moving ahead to the next topic of this lesson is institutional design. Now, the Constitution of India is very long and detailed. It needs to be revised quite regularly. So the makers of our Indian Constitution did not see this Constitution as a sacred book, okay, like a sacred book we have Ramayana that cannot be altered. No, they said it is not sacred and the laws can be altered, okay. So they made rules to include such changes from time to time. that so that our constitution remains updated. Okay, and they thought that it has to be in accordance with the people's aspiration and changes in the society that takes place, so it has to be kept updated. Okay, so they made provisions where changes could be made from time to time, and they were called as constitutional amendments. Now children, when you read the constitution for the first time, it is difficult to understand, but some basic institutional arrangements are easy to understand, like it lays down the procedure for choosing the persons who are going to govern the country. It defines who will have more power to govern the country, and it also puts limits to the government who can do by providing some rights to the citizens that cannot be violated. So with this we come to the end of this chapter. Thank you.